Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. It's great to see you. So I made a discovery, and initially I thought it was relating almost entirely to mail order brides, more specifically when they are living in the host country or where the man is living. But I'm starting to see those patterns of behavior even from locals, from, in my case, Americans, and it might be more common than I ever expected. Anyway, I'll walk through my thought process, and then you guys can tell me whether or not I'm onto something. Maybe this is all obvious, I don't know. So, in regards to mail order brides, I've traveled enough in the world and dated enough women to where I've got a pretty good idea that dating women from other countries really doesn't do a whole lot for you. It doesn't stop them from behaving almost exactly the same, and that it's only the interactions they have with people around them that keep them in that behavioral pattern that their original country kind of provides. That thing that you want, so you're going to that country to get it. If you move them out of there, they lose it. And half the time, even living with them there, you discover things that you didn't know were a problem because of the differences between your behaviors and your cultures that become a problem based on their own culture. In other words, every country has its flaws in the way that the women interact, and they encourage different behaviors out of them. I don't want to go too deep into that. I've already covered it a couple of times. I'll make other in-depth videos later on if it's needed. The point that's relevant here is that when a person were to bring one of those women into their own country, there's a tendency for that woman to either take a bunch of resources and send it back to her family, or worse yet, start moving all of her family into the man's house, to the man's area, until he's so overcrowded that he kind of almost gets pushed out of his own home, loses all control of his household. I kind of think that there's this impression that if like a guy were to marry, say, a young Asian girl, 19, 22 kind of age frame, that he would be in charge of the house and wouldn't get pushed around as if it were an American woman that's a lot more bossy or pushy or demanding. Try going against an entire family and see how that works out. I know most of us wouldn't, but that seems to be a pattern that happens a lot. One of my most recent videos, I discussed a guy who his wife was trying to move in with bringing in like family members, her parents specifically, into the household. And it was pretty obvious to me that the reason why she was doing it was, to kind of push him out. At least that's the impression that I got of it, because these relatives of hers were on her side. There was about to be a divorce. It was almost inevitable. And she was still trying to bring people in. And it certainly wasn't in the context of repairing the marriage, because her parents hate him. They don't like him and they don't get along. Long story short, I started to think about it. I have seen those patterns of behavior in my own relationships to different degrees. I've seen them in other people. Essentially what I'm getting at is the woman gets in the relationship with the guy by whatever means she uses, locks down that relationship either by going steady, by cohabitating, by getting married, whatever her chosen tool is to make that relationship solid, and then gradually toxifies the environment. Maybe not like one day he wakes up and she's just a total bitch and there's no way he can survive and has to run away. That would be too obvious. It's a gradual thing where slowly it becomes more and more toxic, where he spends less and less time at home, which then eventually becomes the excuse for her to be mad at him. You're never at home. We never do anything like we used to. Which that hearing stuff like that can grate a man in his insanity within itself. But she'll gradually make it worse and less pleasant for him to be home, either by bringing in people that disagree with him, that don't like him, bringing friends into the household that he doesn't get along with. All of this stuff that doesn't originally pop up in the relationship where she's still wearing her mask. And I know sometimes guys do this sort of stuff too. I know somebody's gonna mention it. The point is I was starting to look at all of these patterns of behavior that happen post-serious relationship as being almost intentional or subconscious in the direction of trying to get the guy out of the way of whatever she was attempting to get by being in that relationship. Maybe she wants a house, a white picket fence, and kids. The guy really isn't necessarily required, except that he's needed to originally pay for it or provide it in the first place. Then once he does, he's no longer a necessity. That is assuming she doesn't want to just go out and do it all herself. Get him out of the way. Now, in the case of mail order brides, that's obvious. Like, it's really blunt that she's going to move in, she's going to nudge him out of the way, maybe even move on to a younger, more attractive, more alpha male once she realizes that she's kind of exotic in this new country and can have a much better selection of men than she could originally. In the case of local women, her market is probably not going to shift all that much, except for the excess of resources and comfort and time that she's going to get from being in a stable relationship. She'll have a lot more flexibility with what she can do with her time, but it's not going to change drastically, so it's unlikely that she would be able to nudge him out as bluntly. It's going to have to be gradual and subtle. Gentlemen, I'm starting to think that the nagging, irritating kind of a attitude that comes up post-serious relationship, I think that that's all on purpose. Now, some of you are saying, well, obviously, Marcel, but it's something that I've seen enough that I can confidently say when a guy's gonna get married, hey, your wife is gonna start nagging you afterwards to the point where you're not gonna want to be around her anymore. And then she's gonna nag you for not being around. It's like a relationship marriage death spiral, with the majority of the problems being created either artificially or purely by her influence in the first place. Now, I'm sure everybody agrees that once someone's married, that there's a change in the tone of the relationship, that it wouldn't be far-fetched to hear things like, we're married now, so blank needs to happen, or blank needs to change, coming from either side. Part of the reason why I have always had a sound argument for not getting married is, from a blue or purple pill perspective, let's say blue pill, that basically if everything is perfect, if there's no issues in the relationship, then from my old days, my mindset looking out, that would be the only time that it would be acceptable to be married, is if there are no issues, because marriage is a problem amplifier. And then if everything in the relationship is perfect, why in the hell would anybody change it? Like, if it's a perfect relationship, just leave it as it is. Don't inject chaos into the system if you don't have to. Of course, now I don't recommend it at all, but that was my previous argument, or that's the argument that I say to blue pill men when they're considering it now, assuming I don't want to actually disclose a bunch of MGTOW knowledge on them. It really kind of shows a difference in priority, though, when it comes between men and women and the relationships and how they work. See, a man's goal may be to have a healthy, functioning relationship, but when someone else, or the woman in that environment, demands something further, and the relationship is already stable, it begs a question: why? Why do you need this other thing? Is your goal something other than having a perfectly healthy relationship? Why these other strings? If you take the time to really discuss some of these things with people, their true motivations can become really transparent if you know how to look or where to look. I had a long discussion with one of my friends recently. Let's call her Jane. I knew her from years ago and recently started talking to her, just as a friend. And she was mentioning her desires to get married to someone, didn't really have anyone in particular in mind. It took a lot of conversation to lead up to that point, so it wasn't out of the blue that she was discussing this with me. But I actually, at the end of the conversation, I got her to admit that the only reason she wanted to get married is because it's pushed so hard in current culture to do so. Well, at least in her culture, she's from a religious background, and that she knew it wouldn't actually make her happy. It's a story interesting enough, I might actually make a separate video just about it. Big Bad Marcel, destroyer of women's dreams and fantasy fairy tales. On a happy note, when she realized it was cultural validation she was looking for, the approval of her family and not actually the love of the man she was interacting with, it saved both of them a relationship that was ultimately doomed from the start. Bringing it back on topic, and something of a summary, the patterns of behavior that I would expect to see during something like this would be the woman bringing friends in that he's not comfortable with, nagging him or causing him unnecessary emotional pressure and turmoil. Things that weren't a problem before suddenly become a problem. Essentially, anything that would happen in the environment that would cause the man to not want to be there. And whether or not those actions are under the woman's control or are caused by her in some way. A good solid bit of advice I would give to anyone who's experiencing any kind of a toxic relationship, whether it be with a friend, a loved one, a romantic interest, and all of the above. In the old days, I used to say that the people that we interact with should be a sum of all of our interactions. Meaning, if there's mostly toxic things that we interact with them, we can't use the good times to justify all of the bad times, and that it was sort of a weighing the pros and cons with people. I want to take that a step further. I don't think we should weigh the pros and cons. I think that any toxic interactions with people that are optional interactions, friends, being around family for the most part, if it becomes toxic, I think that that interaction with the person, with that theme, whatever it is that they're doing, should be cut out completely. That the goal should be removing or eliminating the toxic experience altogether. I don't think that a person being 30% bad and 70% good should justify being around the 70%. I believe that we should either find a way to remove the 30% or just completely remove the person. An example of that is if, someone is a dick when they're drinking, maybe don't drink with them or don't be around them when they're drunk. Now with friends and colleagues, that's perfectly fine. Relationships, it doesn't quite work that way. Kind of the point is you're expected to accept 100% of the person regardless of their flaws, right? Doesn't really seem like give and take is much on the table either nowadays. So on those grounds, for any of you out there who might be in a toxic romantic relationship of some kind, if it feels like they were 70% good before, and that 30% bad is gradually growing into 60, 70, 80, 90% bad, that's probably intentional. And that's my justification for not even putting up with the 30% in the first place, because it's only going to grow like cancer. Anyway, I hope you all found that interesting. Just sort of a thought that I was going over recently. Let me know what you think down below. This has been Marcel. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more.